When 10-year-old Benjamin Colt arrived at the Mesa Verde Ranch with fresh bruises on his face and terror in his eyes, he never expected the towering rancher James Garrett to drop to his knees and promise that no one would ever hurt him again. But as outlaws from his past ride in claiming he's a thief, and gunfire erupts under the desert storm, Benjamin faces the ultimate test of whether this scarred man's protection is strong enough to break the cycle of abandonment that has defined his young life. Will the boy who has known only cruelty finally find the father he never dared to dream of? The wagon wheels stopped turning with a bone-jarring thud that sent 10-year-old Benjamin Colt tumbling forward into the marshal's broad back. Through the dust cloud rising around them, he could see buildings scattered across the desert, like children's blocks thrown by an angry giant. Mesa Verde Ranch stretched before them under the blazing Arizona sun of 1859, and Benjamin's stomach twisted tighter than rope around a fence post. "End of the line, boy," Marshal Peterson grunted, climbing down from the driver's seat. His boots hit the hard-packed earth with authority that made Benjamin flinch. "This here's your new home, whether you like it or not." Benjamin's fingers found the purple bruise on his cheek, a fresh reminder of what happened when grown-ups made promises they couldn't keep. The last 3 families had said the same thing, that he belonged with them, that things would be different. Each time, his hopes had climbed higher than a church steeple, and each time, they'd come crashing down harder than hail in a thunderstorm. The ranch house rose before them like a fortress made of adobe and timber, its red-tiled roof catching the morning light. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the smell of bacon and coffee that made his empty belly clench with want. But food always came with a price, and Benjamin had learned that lesson written in welts across his back. A man emerged from the shadows of the front porch, and Benjamin's breath caught in his throat. James Garrett stood taller than any human had a right to be, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the world. Silver streaked through his dark hair despite his face looking no older than 40 winters. His hands. Lord, those hands looked big enough to crack walnuts or snap a boy's neck with equal ease. "That's him, is it?" Garrett's voice rumbled like distant thunder, and Benjamin pressed closer to the wagon wheel. "The boy you wrote about?" "Benjamin Colt," Peterson replied, pulling a folded paper from his vest pocket. 10 years old. Been through 4 homes in 2 years. Last family said he was too much trouble to handle. The marshal's eyes found Benjamin's, and something almost like sadness flickered there. His folks died of fever when he was 7. Been bounced around ever since. Benjamin wanted to disappear into the desert sand beneath his feet. They always talked about him like he wasn't standing right there, like he was some broken tool they couldn't figure out how to fix. His threadbare shirt, patched with scraps of different colored cloth, hung loose on his skinny frame. The boots he wore, hand-me-downs from the last family's oldest boy, were held together with strips of rawhide and prayers. Garrett stepped closer, his footsteps deliberate and measured. Benjamin's muscles coiled like a spring, ready to run if those massive hands moved too quickly. But the rancher stopped just outside arm's reach, his storm-gray eyes studying the boy with an intensity that made Benjamin's skin crawl. "You got a preference for what kind of work you do, son?" Garrett asked, his tone careful and controlled. "I ain't your son," Benjamin snapped, the words tumbling out before he could stop them, his chin tilted up in defiance that had been beaten into him by necessity. "And I don't care what work you give me. Won't be here long enough for it to matter." Something flickered across Garrett's weathered features. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. "That's so. And why's that?" Benjamin's bare toes curled in his oversized boots. "Because nobody keeps boys like me. We're too much trouble. Too much work. Too much everything." His voice cracked on the last word, betraying the pain he tried so hard to hide. "Sooner or later, you'll get tired of feeding me and find some excuse to send me packing." The silence stretched between them like a taut rope, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the mesquite bushes. Peterson shifted uncomfortably, his spurs jingling against his heels. Somewhere in the distance a horse whinnied, and Benjamin heard the answering calls of others. Garrett's expression softened in a way that made Benjamin's chest tighten with something he didn't dare name. Hope was a dangerous thing for boys like him. It hurt worse than any beating when it got ripped away. "Well?" Garrett said finally, his voice gentler than Benjamin had expected. "I reckon we'll just have to see about that. Peterson, you want some coffee before you head back to town?" "Much obliged," the marshal replied, relief evident in his tone. He'd done his duty, delivered his unwanted cargo, and now he could wash his hands of the whole mess. Boy's belongings are in that sack there. Benjamin looked at the small burlap bag tied to the wagon's side. Everything he owned in the world could fit in a space smaller than a feed bucket. One change of clothes, both as patched and worn as what he wore. A wooden horse carved by his father's hands before the fever took him. A faded photograph of his parents on their wedding day, their faces already blurring at the edges where he'd touched them too many times. As the two men walked toward the house, their voices fading into meaningless noise, Benjamin stood alone in the courtyard. The sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat trickled down his spine despite the morning coolness. Around him, the ranch hummed with activity, men shouting to each other across the corrals, horses snorting and stamping, the rhythmic sound of someone hammering metal in what must be a blacksmith shop. This was bigger than any place he'd lived before. The last family had owned a small farm with maybe 20 acres and a handful of chickens. Before that, a widow with a tiny house barely big enough for one person, let alone two. And before that, Benjamin pushed those memories down deep, where they couldn't hurt him. A Mexican woman appeared in the doorway, her dark hair streaked with silver and pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a simple brown dress covered by a white apron that looked like it had never seen a stain. Her face, lined by sun and years, held kindness that Benjamin didn't trust. "You must be Benjamin," she said, her accent adding music to the words. "I am Maria Santos. I keep house for Senor Garrett." She gestured toward his bag. "Come, bring your things. You must be hungry, and the morning grows hot." Benjamin's stomach growled loud enough to wake the dead, but he didn't move. Food meant obligation, and obligation meant debt, and debt meant they owned pieces of you until there was nothing left. "I can work for my meals," he said, his voice smaller than he intended. "I'm good with animals, and I can clean stables and mend fences and—" "Mijo," Maria interrupted, her smile sad and knowing. "When did you last eat?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Yesterday morning? The day before? Time blurred when your belly was empty and your feet were always moving toward the next unwanted destination. "I'm fine," he lied. Maria's laugh was warm as fresh bread. "See, I can see how fine you are. Skinny as a fence post and twice as stubborn." She moved closer, and Benjamin tensed, but she only reached for his bag. "Come. The eggs will grow cold, and cold eggs are no good for growing boys." Despite every instinct screaming at him to stay put, to keep his guard up, to remember that kindness always came with a price, Benjamin found his feet following Maria toward the house. The wooden steps creaked under their weight, and he caught glimpses through the windows. Furniture that looked comfortable rather than fancy. Curtains that had been mended but not replaced. Walls decorated with simple crosses and family photographs. It looked like a home, instead of just a house, and that scared him more than any beating ever could. Because homes were for children who belonged somewhere, and Benjamin Colt had learned the hard way that boys like him didn't belong anywhere at all. "Sit wherever you like, mijo." Maria's voice drifted from the kitchen, where pots clanged and something sizzled on the stove. The smell of bacon fat and fresh tortillas filled the air so thick Benjamin could almost taste it. But he couldn't make himself move past the doorway. The dining room table stretched before him like an impossible dream. Polished wood that reflected the morning light. Chairs with actual cushions instead of hard wooden seats. Plates that matched each other instead of being a collection of chipped cast-offs. This was the kind of place where real families ate real meals, not the kind of place for unwanted boys who ate scraps in kitchens while being reminded what a burden they were. Go on. Don't be shy. Garrett's voice came from behind him, and Benjamin spun around so fast he nearly lost his balance. The big man filled the doorway, but he moved carefully, like he was trying not to spook a wild animal. Maria makes the best breakfast this side of the Rio Grande. You'd be doing her an insult not to try it. Benjamin's legs felt like they were made of wet rope, but he forced himself to walk to the closest chair and perch on its edge. His feet didn't touch the floor, making him feel even smaller than usual. Garrett settled into the chair at the head of the table with a grunt that suggested old injuries, and Benjamin watched his every movement, like a mouse watching a hawk. How old are you, boy? Garrett asked, his hands folded on the table in front of him. 10, Benjamin replied, then added quickly, but I'm bigger than I look, and I work harder than boys twice my size. I'm sure you do. Something in Garrett's tone made Benjamin look up sharply, but the man's face showed no mockery. You got schooling? Benjamin's cheeks burned with shame. Some, I can read a little, and I know my numbers up to 100. He didn't mention that most of his learning had come from studying newspapers left behind by travelers, or that he'd taught himself to write by scratching letters in the dirt with sticks. Maria appeared with plates piled higher than Benjamin had ever seen. Scrambled eggs fluffy as clouds, bacon crispy enough to shatter, tortillas still warm from the griddle, and beans seasoned with spices that made his mouth water. She set the largest plate in front of him, with a smile that reached her eyes. Eat, mijo. A bird could not live on what little meat you have on your bones. Benjamin stared at the food, his hands trembling in his lap. This had to be a test of some kind. Maybe they wanted to see if he would be greedy, if he would stuff himself like the pig they thought he was. Or maybe they wanted to see if he had manners, if he knew how to act civilized at a proper table. Something wrong with the food? Garrett asked, and Benjamin realized the man was watching him with those sharp gray eyes. No, sir. It looks... Benjamin swallowed hard. It looks real good. Then eat up. You look like you could use some meat on your bones. But Benjamin's hand froze halfway to the fork. A memory crashed over him like a cold wave. Mrs. Henderson, his third placement, standing over him with a wooden spoon raised high. Greedy little pig, she'd hissed, taking food from the mouths of decent children. You'll eat what I give you when I give it to you, and you'll be grateful for it. He'd been 6 then, still small enough that the spoon left bruises that lasted for weeks, still young enough to cry when he went to bed hungry, still stupid enough to think that being good would make them love him. Are you going to whip me too? The words tumbled out of his mouth before he could stop them, small and broken in the warm kitchen air. The fork clattered from Garrett's hand onto his plate, with a sound like a gunshot. The big man went perfectly still, his weathered face turning pale beneath his tan. Maria gasped from where she stood by the stove, her hand flying to her throat. What did you say? Garrett's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried such weight that Benjamin felt it in his bones. Benjamin's throat closed up tight as a fist. He'd said the wrong thing, done the wrong thing, been the wrong thing again. Story of his life, written in welts and bruises and empty bellies. His chair scraped against the floor as he pushed back from the table, ready to run before the first blow could land. I'm sorry, he choked out. I didn't mean... They always said I ate too much, took too much, wanted too much. Who said that? Garrett's question cut through Benjamin's babbling, like a knife through butter. The rancher rose from his chair, and Benjamin scrambled backward until his spine hit the wall. Who told you such a thing? Benjamin's eyes darted toward the door, measuring the distance, calculating his chances. But Garrett moved between him and escape, without seeming to hurry, those big hands hanging loose at his sides. Not raised to strike, Benjamin realized with confusion. Not clenched into fists, just there. All of them, Benjamin whispered, his voice so quiet he wasn't sure anyone could hear it. Every family, every place they put me. I eat too much. I take up too much space. I cause too much trouble. Tears burned behind his eyes, but he blinked them back furiously. Crying only made it worse. Mrs. Henderson said I was punishment for her sins. Mr. Crawford said I was too stupid to learn proper behavior. The Johnsons said, "Stop." Garrett's voice was gentle as summer rain, but it carried absolute authority. He dropped to one knee, bringing himself closer to Benjamin's eye level, and the boy could see something raw and painful in the older man's face. "Listen to me, son. Are you listening?" Benjamin nodded, not trusting his voice. "Nobody in this house will ever raise a hand to you. Not me, not Maria, not any of the men who work here. You understand me? Nobody. But when I mess up," Benjamin started, "when you mess up, we'll figure out how to fix it. Together. That's what families do." Garrett's eyes held steady on his, and Benjamin saw something there he'd never seen before. A promise that looked like it might actually mean something. "You hungry, boy?" Benjamin's stomach chose that moment to growl loud enough to rattle the windows. And despite everything, he felt his lips twitch towards something that might have been a smile. "Yes, sir." "Then sit back down and eat your breakfast." "And Benjamin?" The rancher waited until the boy met his eyes again. "In this house, there's always enough. You don't have to earn your place at the table. And you don't have to be afraid of taking what you need." As Benjamin climbed back into his chair on shaking legs, Maria appeared at his elbow with a fresh plate. The other had gone cold during their conversation. This one steamed with the same abundance as before, and she ruffled his dark hair with gentle fingers. "Eat, mijo," she said softly. "There is always more where that came from." Benjamin picked up his fork with trembling fingers and took his first bite. The eggs melted on his tongue like butter. The bacon crunched between his teeth, and the tortilla wrapped around it all like a warm hug. He ate slowly at first, still waiting for the trap to spring, for someone to snatch the plate away and remind him of his place. But Garrett just ate his own breakfast and talked about the horses they'd be working with, about the cattle that needed moving to higher pastures, about the well they dug last spring that finally hit sweet water. Normal conversation, the kind Benjamin had heard, drifting from other families' dinner tables but never been part of. When his plate was empty, Maria appeared with seconds before he could even ask, and when those were gone, she offered thirds with the same warm smile. Benjamin's belly was fuller than it had been in months, maybe years, and for the first time since the marshal's wagon had pulled up to the ranch, he felt something that might have been hope. But hope was dangerous for boys like him, because hope made it hurt so much worse when they finally decided you weren't worth keeping after all. The crash of breaking dishes shattered the morning quiet like gunfire. Benjamin bolted upright in his small bed, his heart hammering against his ribs as familiar terror flooded through him. In 3 weeks at the ranch, he had never heard such a sound from the kitchen, where Maria Santos worked her gentle magic with flour and kindness. Racing barefoot across the cold wooden floor, Benjamin burst through the kitchen door to find Maria kneeling beside scattered pieces of her favorite blue plate. But these weren't tears of anger on her weathered cheeks. They were something else entirely, something that made his stomach twist with worry. "Mijo," she whispered, looking up at him with eyes that held secrets. "I have received word from my sister in Santa Fe. My nephew Carlos. He is coming here." Benjamin had heard whispers about Carlos Santos from the ranch hands. Stories told in hushed voices about a young man who had fallen in with bad companions, who had brought shame to his family's good name. The boy's mind raced as he helped Maria gather the broken ceramic pieces. "Is he in trouble?" Benjamin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Before Maria could answer, the sound of approaching horses echoed across the ranch yard. But these weren't the familiar hoofbeats of returning ranch hands. These horses moved with the desperate urgency of animals pushed beyond their limits. Through the kitchen window, Benjamin watched a lone rider slouch in his saddle, his clothes torn and dusty. Even from a distance, the family resemblance was clear. Carlos Santos had inherited his aunt's dark eyes and proud bearing, though both now seemed dimmed by exhaustion and something that looked dangerously like fear. Garrett emerged from the barn, his hand instinctively moving toward the gun at his hip as he approached the stranger. The rancher's weather-beaten face showed no emotion, but Benjamin had learned to read the subtle signs, the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his gray eyes scanned the horizon for additional riders. "You must be Carlos," Garrett said, his voice carrying across the morning air. "Your aunt's been expecting you." The young man, no more than 18 or 19, practically fell from his horse. His legs shook as he tried to stand, and Benjamin could see dark stains on his shirt that might have been blood. Carlos's voice cracked as he spoke, the words tumbling out in a mixture of English and Spanish. "Tio James, they are coming. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow, but they will find me here. I should not have brought this trouble to your house." Maria rushed from the kitchen, her earlier tears forgotten as she embraced her nephew. Benjamin watched from the doorway as the young man collapsed into her arms, his proud facade crumbling like old adobe in a flash flood. "Tell me what happened," Garrett commanded, though his tone held more concern than anger. Carlos lifted his head, and Benjamin saw something in those dark eyes that he recognized all too well, the hollow look of someone who had watched their world crumble around them. "I was working for Señor Valdez in Tucson, keeping books for his trading business. Good, honest work, Tia. I swear this to you." Maria stroked her nephew's hair, as she had once comforted Benjamin during his first nightmare at the ranch. "We believe you, mijo. Continue." But Valdez, he was not honest. He was selling guns to Apache raiders, taking money from both sides. When I discovered his ledgers, when I saw what he was doing. Carlos's voice trailed off as he touched the stains on his shirt. Benjamin's breath caught in his throat. He had seen enough violence in his young life to recognize the signs of a man who had barely escaped with his life. "He tried to kill you," Garrett stated matter-of-factly. Carlos nodded miserably. "His men, they chased me for 3 days. I think I lose them in the canyon country. But," he gestured helplessly at his torn clothes and exhausted horse. The sound of distant thunder rumbled across the desert, though not a cloud marred the brilliant blue sky. Benjamin's blood turned to ice water as he realized it wasn't thunder at all. It was the drumming of many horses moving fast across hard ground. "How many men does Valdez have?" Garrett asked, already moving toward the house where his rifle waited. "Maybe 12, maybe more. And Tio, there is something else you must know." Carlos struggled to his feet, swaying with exhaustion. "Valdez, he has been asking questions about this ranch, about you, and about—" His eyes found Benjamin standing frozen in the doorway. "About a boy who lives here now." The words hit Benjamin like a physical blow. Somehow, impossibly, his past had found him again. The brief months of safety, of belonging, of daring to hope for a different future, all of it seemed to crumble like castles built of desert sand. "What does he want with Benjamin?" Maria demanded, her voice sharp with protective fury. Carlos looked sick as he answered. "The boy, he was in Tucson when Valdez first started the gun running. Maybe the boy saw something. Maybe he knows something. Valdez, he does not like loose ends." Benjamin's knees went weak as the terrible truth crashed over him. He had been in Tucson, had spent 2 horrible weeks in an alley behind Valdez's trading post, surviving on scraps and trying to avoid the man's cruel foreman. He had seen the covered wagons that arrived under cover of darkness, had watched crates being loaded and unloaded by nervous men who jumped at every shadow. But he had been just another street orphan then, invisible and forgotten. How could Valdez possibly know where he had ended up? "The marshal," Benjamin whispered, the pieces clicking together in his mind. "When Marshal Peterson brought me here, he had to file papers, official papers that would be on record in Tucson." Garrett's face went stone hard as the implications became clear. "So Valdez traced you here through territorial records." The thunder of approaching horses grew louder, close enough now that they could see the dust cloud rising on the horizon. Benjamin counted at least 10 riders, maybe more. Their horses stretched out in a hard gallop that spoke of desperate men with nothing left to lose. "Maria, get the boy into the root cellar," Garrett commanded. "Carlos, can you still handle a gun?" The young man straightened despite his exhaustion, some echo of family pride flickering in his dark eyes. "Sí, tío. I will not bring dishonor to your house." But Benjamin stepped forward, his small hands clenched into fists. "No, I won't hide anymore. If they want me, if this is about something I saw in Tucson, then running won't solve anything. It'll just put all of you in danger." "Boy, you're 10 years old," Garrett said firmly. "This isn't your fight." "Yes, it is," Benjamin replied, with a certainty that surprised them all. "And besides, I remember things about Valdez's operation, things that might help us stop him once and for all." Maria crossed herself and whispered a prayer in Spanish as the sound of approaching danger grew ever closer. In the distance, the first rider crested the hill overlooking the ranch, his rifle glinting in the morning sun like a promise of violence to come. The peaceful world Benjamin had begun to believe in was about to be tested by fire and blood, and for the first time in his young life, he was determined not to run from the storm that was coming. Garrett's weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency as he distributed ammunition among his men. The ranch hands had responded to the emergency bell with the swift precision of soldiers, though Benjamin could see the worry etched into their sun-darkened faces. These were good men who had signed on to punch cattle and break horses, not to face down a dozen desperate killers. "Listen up," Garrett commanded, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Valdez wants the boy, but he can't afford to leave witnesses. That means he's coming for all of us." Benjamin pressed himself against the kitchen window, watching the dust cloud grow larger on the horizon. His stomach churned with guilt and fear, knowing that his presence had brought this danger to people who had shown him nothing but kindness. "There's something else," Carlos said quietly, checking the chambers of an old Colt revolver that Maria had retrieved from her late husband's belongings. "Valdez? He is not just angry about the gun running. He has bigger plans." Garrett paused in his preparations. "What kind of plans?" "He wants to control the water rights in this territory. The trading post, the guns, all of it was just the beginning. If he can drive out the established ranchers, buy up their land for nothing." Carlos gestured toward the sprawling vista of Mesa Verde Ranch. "This is some of the best grazing land in Arizona territory." The implications hit Benjamin like a punch to the stomach. This wasn't just about him anymore, it was about everything Garrett had built, everything that had become home. Valdez wasn't just hunting a witness. He was eliminating competition. "Mijo," Maria called softly, her voice heavy with concern. "There is a tunnel beneath the root cellar. It leads to the old mine shaft on the North Ridge. You could be in Santa Fe by tomorrow night." Benjamin turned from the window, his young face set with a determination that seemed too old for his years. "I'm not running anymore, Maria. Every time I run, someone else gets hurt." "Boys got sand," muttered Jake Morrison, the oldest of the ranch hands. "But sand don't stop bullets." Through the window, Benjamin could now make out individual riders. Valdez himself rode in the center of the group, a lean man with silver-streaked hair and cold eyes that missed nothing. Even at a distance, his presence seemed to suck warmth from the morning air. 12 riders, reported Tommy Chen, one of the younger hands who had climbed onto the roof for a better view. "All armed, and they're splitting up. Looks like they plan to surround the house." Garrett cursed under his breath. His 6 ranch hands, plus Carlos and himself, made 8 guns against 12. The odds weren't impossible, but they weren't good either. "There's another way," Benjamin said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know something about Valdez that could stop this without anyone getting killed." All eyes turned to the boy as he stepped away from the window. His small hands trembled, but his voice grew stronger as he continued. "When I was in Tucson, I saw him meeting with someone important, a man in a fancy suit who rode in a government carriage." Carlos's eyes widened. What did this man look like? Benjamin closed his eyes, forcing himself to remember details he had tried to forget. Older, maybe 50, had a gold watch chain and a scar on his left hand. They were talking about contracts, about supplying weapons to the territorial militia. Dios mío, Carlos breathed. That sounds like Territorial Governor Reeves. If Valdez has been selling government weapons to Apache raiders, that would be treason, Garrett finished grimly. A hanging offense. Benjamin nodded, his heart racing as the pieces fell into place. But I'm the only witness. That's why he needs me dead so badly. It's not just about the gun running, it's about his deal with the governor. The thunder of approaching hoofbeats grew louder, close enough now that they could hear individual voices calling commands. Valdez was positioning his men for an assault, confident that superior numbers would carry the day. How close do we let them get? Asked Pete Kowalski, nervously checking his rifle for the third time. Before Garrett could answer, a white flag appeared above the ridge. One of Valdez's men rode forward slowly, his hands visible and empty. James Garrett, the rider called. Senor Valdez wishes to speak with you. He says there is no need for violence if you are reasonable. Benjamin felt his stomach drop. He had heard those same words before, in a dozen different towns, from a dozen different men who smiled while they planned to hurt him. It's a trap, he whispered. But Garrett was already moving toward the door. Maybe, but I need to buy us time to think. Tio, no! Carlos grabbed the rancher's arm. You don't know this man like I do. He will smile at you and shoot you in the back. Son, I've been dealing with men like Valdez since before you were born. Garrett's voice carried the confidence of someone who had faced down more than his share of dangerous men. Besides, what choice do we have? He's got us outnumbered and outgunned. Benjamin watched through the window as Garrett walked across the ranch yard, his hands empty but ready. The boy's heart hammered against his ribs as Valdez himself rode down from the ridge, flanked by two of his most trusted gunmen. Senor Garrett, Valdez called out, his voice smooth as silk over steel. You have something that belongs to me. Can't say that I do, Garrett replied, stopping just out of easy pistol range. But I'm listening. Valdez's cold smile sent shivers down Benjamin's spine. A boy. Small, dark hair, maybe 10 years old. He has seen things that could cause trouble for certain business arrangements. Lots of boys in Arizona territory, Garrett said mildly. You'll have to be more specific. Do not play games with me, rancher. Valdez's voice hardened like iron cooling in winter air. The boy was in Tucson during the troubles there. He may have witnessed certain activities that were meant to remain private. Benjamin's hands clenched into fists as he watched the deadly dance unfolding in the ranch yard. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to disappear into the desert before more good people died because of his cursed luck. But Maria's warm hand settled on his shoulder, holding him steady. Your place is here now, mijo, she whispered, with people who care about you. Through the window, Benjamin saw Garrett's shoulders stiffen almost imperceptibly. The rancher had made his decision. Even if I knew what you were talking about, Garrett said slowly, I wouldn't turn over a child to men like you. Not for all the gold in California. Valdez's mask of civility finally slipped, revealing the cold killer beneath. Then you have chosen death, Senor Garrett. For yourself and everyone who stands with you. The negotiation was over. As Valdez wheeled his horse around and galloped back toward his men, Benjamin realized with crystal clarity that the next few minutes would determine whether he finally had a real family or whether he would once again be alone in a world that seemed determined to grind him into dust. The war for Mesa Verde Ranch was about to begin, and this time Benjamin was determined not to run from the fire. Lightning split the sky like God's own whip as Benjamin pressed his back against the kitchen door, watching 6 riders circle the ranch house like hungry wolves. Their horses snorted steam in the cold night air, and their leader, the man called Slade, sat tall in his saddle, with a rope coiled at his side that made the boy's stomach twist into knots. James Garrett, Slade's voice cut through the howling wind. Send out the thief, and nobody gets hurt tonight. Benjamin's hand shook as he gripped the doorframe. 3 weeks ago, he would have run into the darkness without looking back, leaving whoever had shown him kindness to face the consequences alone. But something had changed inside him during his time at Mesa Verde Ranch. The daily rhythm of caring for horses, sharing meals at a real table, and sleeping in a bed that nobody could take away, had planted roots deeper than he'd ever imagined possible. Garrett emerged from his study, checking the bullets in his rifle with steady fingers. His weathered face showed no fear, only the quiet determination of a man who had fought for everything he owned. "You don't have to face this, son," he said quietly to Benjamin. "There's a horse saddled in the back barn. You could be miles away before they knew you were gone." The offer hung in the air between them like smoke from a dying fire. Benjamin knew it made sense. One boy's freedom wasn't worth a good man's life. But as he looked at Garrett's calm, gray eyes, he remembered the rancher's words from weeks before. What a man's worth isn't decided by what others think of him. It's decided by what he chooses to do when the choice matters. "I'm staying," Benjamin whispered, surprised by the strength in his own voice. Maria Santos appeared from the shadows carrying her late husband's shotgun, her dark eyes blazing with protective fury. She had lost one child to fever 3 winters past, and her expression said clearly that she would not lose another to men's greed and cruelty. "That boy is family now," she declared, positioning herself at the window overlooking the front porch. "And family protects family." Outside, Slade dismounted and walked toward the house with confident steps, his spurs jingling like tiny bells in the storm. 2 of his men flanked him, while the others remained mounted, their rifles ready. The outlaw leader had done this before Benjamin could see it in the practiced way he approached, in the casual cruelty of his smile. "I know you're in there, boy," Slade called, his voice carrying easily over the wind. "Got a witness says you stole $500 in gold from my gambling hall in Tucson. That's hanging money in this territory." Benjamin's breath caught in his throat. He had been in Tucson 3 months ago, staying with a family who had taken him in only to use his small fingers for picking pockets and stealing from market stalls. When he'd finally escaped their basement prison, he'd taken nothing but the clothes on his back and a crust of bread. But who would believe the word of an orphan against a man with money and influence? "The boy's done nothing wrong," Garrett called back, his voice steady as bedrock. "And you're trespassing on private property. I suggest you mount up and ride out while you still can." Slade's laughter was cold as January wind. "That's mighty brave talk for a man outnumbered 2 to 1. But I didn't come here to fight, Garrett. I came for justice. Hand over the thief, and we'll settle this legal-like with Judge Morrison in town." But Benjamin had heard that tone before, in the voices of other men who had claimed to represent justice. He knew that Judge Morrison was Slade's cousin, and that any trial would end with a noose around his neck whether he was guilty or not. The powerful protected their own, and orphan boys were as disposable as yesterday's newspaper. Thunder rolled across the mesa, and in its echo, Benjamin heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching from the east. His heart sank, thinking Slade had brought reinforcements, but Garrett's face brightened with grim satisfaction. "That'll be my ranch hands, coming back from moving the cattle to high ground," the rancher said loud enough for Slade to hear. 12 good men who don't take kindly to threats against their boss or his family. The calculation in Slade's eyes shifted as he counted odds and weighed options. 6 desperate outlaws against 12 seasoned cowboys was no longer the easy victory he had planned. But greed and pride are powerful motivators, and the outlaw leader had invested too much in this hunt to walk away empty-handed. "Maybe so," Slade admitted, backing toward his horse. "But winter's coming, Garrett. Long, cold months when men get careless. When boys wander too far from the house, chasing stray calves. Accidents happen in weather like that." The threat hung in the air like poison gas, and Benjamin felt ice form in his veins. He had brought danger to these good people, and now they would all pay the price for his presence. The familiar weight of guilt settled on his shoulders like a lead blanket, heavier than all the accusations and beatings he had endured. But as Slade and his men rode into the storm, Garrett's large hand settled on Benjamin's shoulder with surprising gentleness. "Don't you go thinking this is your fault, son," the rancher said quietly. "Men like Slade create their own trouble wherever they go. We're just the latest chapter in a story that started long before you were born." Benjamin wanted to believe those words, but doubt gnawed at him like a hungry rat. Outside, the storm raged on, and somewhere in that darkness, 6 dangerous men were planning their return. The boy who had learned to expect the worst from life could feel the familiar patterns reasserting themselves. Just when happiness seemed possible, reality came crashing down, like a house built on sand. "What do we do now?" he asked, hating how small and frightened his voice sounded. Garrett checked his rifle one more time, then moved to secure the shutters against the wind and rain. "Now, we prepare," he said simply, "and we trust that sometimes good men can stand against the storm and still be standing when morning comes." But in the howling darkness beyond the windows, Benjamin could hear something that sounded like his own doom approaching on horseback, and he wondered if even James Garrett's courage would be enough to hold back the tide of consequences that seemed to follow orphan boys wherever they dared to dream of home. The sound of splintering wood jolted Benjamin from restless sleep as Slade's men kicked in the barn door, where 12 horses whinnied in terror. Dawn was still 2 hours away, but the outlaws had returned under cover of the storm's dying fury. And this time, they weren't interested in talk or negotiations. Benjamin rolled from his bed and pressed his eye to the window crack, his heart hammering like a blacksmith's anvil as he watched dark figures move through the barnyard with torches held high. The message was clear. If Garrett wouldn't surrender the boy willingly, Slade would burn everything the rancher had built until he had no choice but to comply. "They're trying to flush us out," Garrett whispered, appearing beside Benjamin with his rifle cradled in his arms. The rancher's face was grim but determined, like a general preparing for a battle he knew would cost more than victory was worth. Smart tactics for desperate men. Maria Santos crept into the room carrying a canvas bag that clinked with the sound of ammunition and supplies. Her weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency as she distributed bullets and jerky to her makeshift family, preparing them for what might be their last stand together. "The hands won't be back until afternoon," she reported quietly. "Pedro took them to the far pasture to check on the cattle we moved yesterday. They don't know we need help." Benjamin's stomach dropped like a stone thrown into a deep well. 3 people against 6 armed outlaws wasn't a fight. It was a massacre waiting to happen. But as he looked at the faces of the 2 adults who had claimed him as family, he saw no trace of regret for their decision to protect him. Outside, orange flames licked at the barn's wooden walls as Slade's torches found kindling in the old hay and dried timber. The horses screamed and kicked in their stalls, trapped by smoke and panic, and Benjamin felt something break inside his chest at the sound of their suffering. "I have to go out there," he whispered, starting toward the door. "Those animals don't deserve to burn because of me." Garrett's strong hand caught his arm, stopping him with gentle firmness. "That's exactly what Slade wants, son. He's counting on your good heart to make you do something foolish." But Benjamin pulled free, his young face set with determination that surprised them both. "Then maybe it's time I stopped letting my heart make me weak," he said, grabbing his coat from the peg by the door. "Maybe it's time I chose to be strong instead." Before either adult could stop him, Benjamin slipped through the kitchen door and sprinted across the yard toward the burning barn. Smoke stung his eyes and filled his lungs, but the boy had grown up in dangerous places and knew how to move quietly, even when fear tried to make him clumsy. The first horse he reached was Moonbeam, Garrett's gentle mare, who had been the first animal to trust him completely. Her eyes rolled white with terror as flames crept closer to her stall, and Benjamin's hands shook as he fumbled with the latch that seemed determined to stay closed. Come on," he whispered desperately, finally working the metal free and swinging the stall door wide. Moonbeam bolted past him toward safety, and Benjamin moved to the next stall, then the next, releasing panicked animals into the storm-washed night. But smoke was thickening faster than he could work, and the roof beams above his head groaned ominously as fire ate through their support. Benjamin knew he had maybe 2 minutes before the whole structure came down, trapping anyone still inside beneath burning timber and crushing weight. That's when he heard it, a sound that made his blood freeze in his veins. Someone was crying in the back of the barn, high and desperate and terrified. Benjamin had heard that same sound coming from his own throat too many times to mistake it for anything else. He pushed deeper into the smoke, following the sound to a stall at the barn's far end, where he found something that made no sense at all. A girl about his own age, huddled in the corner, her face streaked with tears and soot, her dress torn and dirty from hard travel. "Please don't hurt me," she whispered when she saw him, pressing herself against the wooden wall, as if she could disappear into its grain. "I didn't mean to hide here. I was just so cold and scared." Benjamin stared at her in confusion, his mind racing to make sense of her presence. Who was this child? And how had she come to be hiding in Garrett's barn during the middle of an outlaw attack? "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quickly, extending his hand toward her. "But we have to get out of here right now. The whole barn's about to come down." The girl looked at his outstretched hand with the wariness of someone who had learned not to trust easily, and Benjamin recognized the expression because he had worn it himself not so long ago. But time was running out, and the roof beams were beginning to sag dangerously overhead. "My name's Benjamin," he said, trying to keep his voice calm, even as panic clawed at his chest. "What's yours?" "Lucy," she whispered, taking his hand with trembling fingers. "Lucy Carson. My papa's looking for me, but I got lost in the storm." Benjamin's mind raced as he led her toward the barn's main door, dodging falling embers and breathing smoke that burned like acid in his lungs. Carson, he'd heard that name before, but where? Then it hit him like a physical blow, and he understood why Slade had been so confident about his accusations. Lucy Carson was the daughter of Judge Morrison's best friend, a wealthy merchant whose political connections reached all the way to the territorial capital. If she had been reported missing around the same time money had disappeared from Slade's gambling hall, it would be easy enough to blame both crimes on the same convenient scapegoat. They burst from the burning barn just as the roof collapsed behind them, sending sparks cascading into the night sky like falling stars. Benjamin shielded Lucy with his body as burning debris rained down around them, then pulled her toward the house where Garrett and Maria waited with weapons ready. But Slade stepped from the shadows between them and safety, his gun drawn and pointed directly at Benjamin's chest. The outlaw leader's face was twisted with cruel satisfaction, as if all his careful planning had finally paid off exactly as he'd hoped. "Well, well," Slade drawled, his voice carrying clearly over the crackling flames. "Looks like our little thief has found himself another victim. That's Judge Morrison's goddaughter you're dragging around, boy. Her papa's been looking for her ever since she disappeared from Tucson 3 days ago." Benjamin felt the world tilt sideways as the pieces of Slade's trap finally clicked into place. The missing gold, the missing girl, the convenient timing of his own arrival at Mesa Verde Ranch. It was all connected in a web of lies and coincidence that would be impossible to untangle in any court of law. "I found her hiding in the barn," Benjamin said desperately, his voice breaking with the weight of his fear. "She was scared and lost. I was trying to help her." But Slade's smile was cold as winter moonlight, and Benjamin knew that explanations wouldn't matter now. The truth rarely did when powerful men had already decided what they wanted to believe. The barn door crashed open like thunder, and Benjamin's heart nearly jumped clean out of his chest. Slade stood there like a nightmare come to life, his gun pointed straight at the boy. Rain poured down behind the outlaw, making him look like some demon crawled up from the depths of hell itself. "Well, well," Slade's voice was mean as a rattler's hiss. "Found you, boy?" Benjamin backed up against Moonbeam's stall, his hands shaking like autumn leaves. The mare whinnied softly, sensing danger the way animals do. Where was Garrett? Where were the ranch hands? The storm had swallowed up all the sounds of the world, leaving just him and this terrible man in the flickering lantern light. "I told you I never took your gold," Benjamin whispered, but his voice came out squeaky and scared. Slade laughed, cold as winter ice. "Don't matter now if you did or didn't. What matters is you cost me face in front of my men. Made me look weak. Can't have that." The boy's mind raced like a Mustang running from wolves. He thought about all the times he'd run before, all the times he'd hidden in shadows, and hoped nobody would find him. But this time felt different. This time he had something to lose: a real bed, warm meals, and a man who called him son. This time, running felt like giving up on the best thing that had ever happened to him. "You gonna shoot an unarmed boy?" Benjamin asked, surprised by how steady his voice sounded now. "Might. Depends on how much trouble you give me." Slade stepped closer, water dripping from his hat brim. "See? I got a new plan. Gonna take you back to Tucson. Let folks see what happens to thieves who cross me. Make an example." But Benjamin noticed something important. Slade kept looking over his shoulder toward the barn door. The outlaw was nervous, jumpy as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. That meant he was alone, or nearly so. That meant he was scared too, even if he was trying not to show it. "My pa won't let you take me," Benjamin said, and saying the word pa gave him strength he didn't know he had. "Your pa?" Slade's face twisted up ugly. "That rancher ain't your pa, boy. He's just some lonely fool playing pretend. You think he really cares about a worthless little street rat like you?" The words hit harder than any fist ever had. Benjamin felt something crack inside his chest. All the doubts he'd been pushing down, bubbling up like poison. Maybe Slade was right. Maybe Garrett was just playing games, trying to fill a hole left by his real son. Maybe when things got truly dangerous, the rancher would decide Benjamin wasn't worth the trouble after all. "That's right," Slade said, seeing the doubt in the boy's eyes. "You know it's true. Nobody wants damaged goods like you. Nobody keeps boys who bring nothing but trouble." Thunder boomed overhead, shaking the barn walls. In that moment of deafening sound, Benjamin heard something else. The soft click of a gun being cocked. But it wasn't Slade's gun making that sound. "Touch that boy, and you're a dead man." Garrett's voice cut through the storm like a blade through butter. Benjamin spun around to see the rancher standing in the shadows near the hayloft ladder, his rifle trained on Slade's chest. Water streamed from Garrett's clothes, and his gray eyes were hard as winter stone. Behind him, Benjamin could make out the shapes of ranch hands spreading through the barn like ghosts. "Wondered when you'd show," Slade said. But his gun never wavered from Benjamin. "Too bad you're too late. Boy's coming with me, one way or another. Over my dead body. That can be arranged." Slade's finger tightened on the trigger. "But the boy dies first." Benjamin saw it all happening, like he was watching from outside his own skin. He saw Slade's knuckle go white on the trigger. He saw Garrett's face go pale with horror. He saw the ranch hands raising their weapons but knowing they'd never be fast enough. Time slowed down like thick honey. Benjamin thought about all the beatings he'd taken without fighting back, all the times he'd curled up small and hoped the pain would stop soon. He thought about how Garrett had promised nobody would hurt him again, and how the rancher was about to die trying to keep that promise. That's when Benjamin did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He didn't run. He didn't hide. Instead, he dove sideways into a pile of hay bales just as Slade's gun roared like a cannon in the enclosed space. The bullet meant for Benjamin's heart buried itself in the wooden beam where his head had been a heartbeat before. Garrett's rifle answered immediately, and Slade screamed as the bullet took him in the shoulder, spinning him around like a child's top. The outlaw's gun flew from his hand, skittering across the hay-covered floor. But the fight wasn't over. Two more men came charging through the barn door, their faces twisted with desperation and greed. These weren't the kind of outlaws who gave up easy. They were the kind who'd rather die fighting than face a hangman's rope. The barn exploded into chaos. Gun smoke filled the air thick as fog. Horses screamed and kicked at their stall doors. Men shouted and cursed as they fought among the shadows and hay bales. Benjamin crawled behind a water trough, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst. He watched Garrett move like a man half his age, dodging bullets and returning fire with deadly precision. The rancher had spent years fighting Apaches and rustlers. This wasn't his first battle by a long shot. One of Slade's men tried to circle around behind Garrett, but Cookie Henderson, the oldest of the ranch hands, was waiting for him. The two men grappled in the dim light, rolling through the hay and dirt, while their guns lay forgotten nearby. The other outlaw had taken cover behind the grain bins, trading shots with Miguel Santos, Maria's nephew who worked with the horses. Miguel was young and quick, but the outlaw was experienced and crafty. It looked like a standoff that could last all night. That's when Benjamin noticed something that made his stomach drop to his boots. Slade, bleeding and wounded, was crawling toward his fallen gun. The outlaw's face was twisted with pain and hatred, but his eyes burned with the need for revenge. "Pa!" Benjamin shouted, but his voice was lost in the thunder of gunfire. Slade's fingers closed around his pistol grip. He raised the weapon with shaking hands, aiming at Garrett's back, while the rancher fought the other man. Benjamin didn't think. He just moved. The boy launched himself from behind the water trough like a wildcat, throwing his small body at Slade just as the outlaw pulled the trigger. The gun went off, the bullet going wide and burying itself in the barn roof. Slade roared with fury and pain, trying to shake Benjamin off like a dog shaking off fleas. But the boy held on with everything he had, his small fists pounding at the man's wounded shoulder until Slade howled and dropped the gun again. "You little devil!" Slade grabbed Benjamin by the throat with his good hand. "I'll snap your neck like a chicken bone." Benjamin couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only kick and struggle as black spots danced in front of his eyes. But just before the darkness took him, he heard the sweetest sound in the world, Garrett's voice, full of love and fury. "Let him go." The last thing Benjamin saw before he fainted was his pa standing over them both, his rifle pointed right between Slade's eyes and an expression on his face that said he wouldn't hesitate to pull that trigger if he had to. Benjamin woke up in his own bed, soft morning light streaming through the small window that faced the eastern mountains. For a moment, he forgot where he was and why his throat hurt so bad. Then it all came flooding back. The barn, the gunfight, Slade's hands around his neck. He sat up fast, his heart racing. "Pa? Right here, son." Garrett was sitting in the wooden chair beside the bed, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. His clothes were clean now, but Benjamin could see the worry lines around his eyes, the way his hand shook just a little when he reached for the water cup on the bedside table. "Is it over?" Benjamin's voice came out like a frog's croak. Garrett nodded, helping him take small sips of cool water. "It's over. Slade and his men won't be bothering anyone again. Marshal Peterson took them to Tucson this morning. They'll face trial for theft, attempted murder, and a whole list of other crimes." Benjamin lay back against his pillow, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. "Did I really jump on him? It feels like a crazy dream." "You sure did." Garrett's voice was thick with emotion. "Bravest thing I ever saw in my life. But don't you ever scare me like that again, you hear? When I saw him grab you." The rancher's voice broke off, and he had to look away for a moment. "I couldn't let him hurt you," Benjamin said simply. "You're my pa now. That's what family does, right? They protect each other." Garrett's eyes filled with tears he didn't try to hide. "That's right, son. That's exactly right." Maria appeared in the doorway with a tray of soup and fresh bread. Her own eyes were red from crying, but she smiled when she saw Benjamin sitting up. "About time you woke up, little warrior. The whole territory is talking about how you saved the day." "I didn't save nothing," Benjamin protested. "Pa and the hands did all the real fighting." "Maybe," Maria said, setting the tray on the bedside table. "But you did something more important. You showed everyone what kind of man you're growing up to be." As Benjamin ate his soup, Garrett told him the rest of the story. Cookie Henderson had a black eye and sore ribs, but he'd be fine. Miguel had taken a bullet in the arm, but Doc Morrison said he'd heal up good as new. None of the ranch hands blamed Benjamin for the trouble. In fact, they all seemed prouder of him than ever. "What about the real thief?" Benjamin asked between spoonfuls of soup. "The one who actually stole the gold?" "Caught him in Phoenix 2 days ago," Garrett said. "Turns out he's been using your name for months, letting you take the blame for his crimes. Marshal Peterson says the charges against you are being dropped in every town from here to California." Benjamin felt a weight lift off his shoulders that he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten what it felt like without it. "So, I'm really free? Nobody's gonna come looking for me no more?" "Nobody but us when supper time comes around." Garrett ruffled the boy's hair gently. "You're home now, Benjamin, for as long as you want to be." After Maria left and Garrett went to check on the horses, Benjamin lay in his bed, thinking about all the changes in his life since that first day when he'd asked if he was going to be whipped. He thought about Moonbeam, who nickered softly whenever she saw him coming. He thought about the reading lessons Garrett gave him every evening by lamplight. He thought about how Maria always saved him the biggest piece of whatever pie she made. But mostly he thought about the word family, and how it didn't always mean the people you were born to. Sometimes it meant the people who chose to love you anyway, even when you came with trouble following behind like a shadow. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called. To his surprise, it was Miguel Santos, his arm in a white sling but grinning from ear to ear. "Heard you were finally awake, pequeño loco." "Miguel, Maria said you got shot. Are you okay?" The young man shrugged with his good shoulder. "Takes more than one bullet to stop a Santos. Besides, it was worth it to see Slade's face when he realized he'd been beaten by a boy and a bunch of ranch hands." Miguel sat on the edge of the bed, his expression growing serious. "I wanted to thank you, Benjamin. What you did in that barn, throwing yourself at Slade like that, it gave us the chance we needed to end the fight. You probably saved lives." Benjamin felt his cheeks get hot. "I just didn't want him to hurt Pa." "I know. That's what made it so brave." Miguel reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and silver. "This belonged to my father. He gave it to me before he died, and someday I'll give it to my son. But I want you to have it now, as a reminder of the night you became a true member of this family." It was a simple silver cross on a thin chain, worn smooth by years of handling. Benjamin had never owned anything so fine or so meaningful. "I can't take this. It's too important." "That's exactly why you should have it," Miguel said, fastening the chain around Benjamin's neck. "My father always said the most important gifts are the ones we give to people who matter." After Miguel left, Benjamin held the cross in his small hand and thought about all the people who had mattered in his short life. There hadn't been many before he came to the ranch, but now he felt surrounded by folks who cared about him. That evening, Garrett came back to check on him before supper. The rancher looked better now, the worry lines smoothed out and his hands steady again. "How you feeling, son?" "Better. A lot better." Benjamin fingered the cross at his throat. "Pa, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Before, when Slade said you were just playing pretend about caring for me, did that hurt your feelings?" Garrett was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window at the desert that stretched away toward the mountains. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, but sure. "It hurt because, for just a second, I worried you might believe him. But then I saw you risk your life to save mine, and I knew you understood the truth." "What truth?" "That love isn't something you pretend. It's something you choose, every single day. And I choose you, Benjamin Colt. Not because you replaced Daniel, but because you're exactly who you are. Brave and loyal and stubborn as a mule when you set your mind to something." Benjamin felt tears prick at his eyes, but they were good tears this time. "I choose you too, Pa. I choose all of you." That night, as the sun set over the mesa and painted the sky in shades of gold and purple, Benjamin Colt fell asleep in his own bed, in his own room, in his own home. Outside his window, The desert bloomed with evening flowers that would close up again before dawn, beautiful and brief as moments of grace. But some things, Benjamin had learned, were built to last longer than desert flowers. Things like family bonds forged in fire, and love that chose to stay even when staying was dangerous. Those things could bloom forever, if you tended them right. And as sleep took him, Benjamin smiled, knowing he'd finally found a place where he could put down roots and grow into the man he was meant to be.